Here it is as I was told it once, old but new minted with each fresh telling. Our world is sick, boy, very sick. A virus got in a long time ago, and we've got so used to its effects, we've forgotten what it was like before we became ill. I'm talking about cities, see? Human cultures were originally homeostatic. They existed in a self-sustained equilibrium, with no notion of time and progress like we've got. Then the city virus got in. No one's really sure where it came from or who gave it to us, but like all viral organisms, its one directive is to use up all available resources in producing copies of itself. More and more copies until there is no raw material left, and the host body, overwhelmed, can only die. The cities want us to become good builders. Eventually, we'll build rockets and carry the virus to other worlds. Cities have their own way of talking to you. Catch the side of the reflection of a neon sign, and it'll spell out a magic word that summons strange dreams. Or make tape recordings of traffic noise and listen to them at night. You'll hear the voices of the city coming through, telling you things, showing you pictures. But those of us who know the secret learn ways to unlock the power in cities. We make a pact with them, and they give us gifts in return. Love it or hate it, graffiti is an integral part of urban life. Vibrant works of guerrilla art can be found on the walls of every major city on the planet, and Oklahoma is no different. And despite the constant threat of law enforcement, graffiti artists persist in their territorial game of urban domination, with paint as their primary weapon. Graffiti is typically classified as a form of vandalism, but the term vandalism requires an intention of destruction, and regardless of whether we agree with any particular instance of graffiti art, it's hard for me to believe that any act of artistic expression is destructive. Paint, in general, is a protective substance. Think of the cars in Grant Morrison's image of magical traffic. Just look at any lot of abandoned old cars and you'll see how quickly rust takes over once the protective layer is neglected. Or look at this example I found of this old derelict oil well. But aside from protection, paint also denotes a sort of ownership. Rarely, if ever, do we paint an object that is meant to be thrown out, except in the case of brightly colored product packaging, which still implies ownership on behalf of the company whose colors adorn the box. Painting is often a kind of ritual completion, the finishing touches that transform a new house into a potential home. The perception of ownership is perhaps the most well understood and most controversial aspect of graffiti culture. After all, who are these artists to paint on property that isn't theirs? Graffiti artists understand this concept well and ignore property laws with blatant middle fingers towards those who disagree with their claim to ownership. While there are people who have an extreme aversion to any kind of illegal art, most people I have met understand that laws do not necessarily denote morality and instead have a more moderate opinion. They say something like, I like graffiti when it's on abandoned buildings or overpasses, but painting on small businesses or someone's car is over the line. This is a reasonable opinion, but it's usually stated as if it's a stance against graffiti culture, when most graffiti artists share similar outlooks. Now, quality is in the eye of the beholder, but I think most people would agree that the art on abandoned buildings, highways, and train cars are more impressive than those found on businesses or personal property. Look at these two boxcars that I found and compare the tags on these to the tags that we've found on like electrical boxes or things like that. Train cars are a perfect example of this in action. The ecosystem between graffiti artists and railroad security is a delicate one, and experienced artists are always careful not to obstruct the necessary signage printed on rail cars. Take a look at this video, and I'll pause it at a few key points, But just try and see for yourself which artists are taking care not to cover important signage and which ones aren't. In 1995, a new zoning law in New York City sequestered adult establishments to operation in zones that were designated as non-residential. This move pushed many businesses away from the urban centers they once occupied and towards the commercial waterfront areas. In their provocatively titled essay, Sex in Public, queer theorists Lauren Berlant and Michael Warner criticized this law and the effect it would certainly have on the queer community of Christopher Street. Because this was the 90s and queer people had few safe places to meet, Christopher Street became a hub for gay people to meet one another. For gay people, for whom sex is often stigmatized and meeting partners can be difficult, the porn theaters and sex shops that made Christopher Street home provided a necessary sexual locus for queer people to gather around. And not everyone needed to patronize the adult shops in order to reap the benefit of the communities that gathered around them. Berlant and Warner write, "The gay bars on Christopher Street draw customers from people who come there because of its sex trade. The street is cruisier because of the sex shops. The boutiques do more business for the same reasons. Not all of the thousands who migrate or make pilgrimages to Christopher Street use the porn shops, but all benefit from the fact that some do. After a certain point, a quantitative change is a qualitative change. A critical mass develops and the street becomes queer. It develops a dense, publicly accessible sexual culture. It therefore becomes a base for non-porn businesses, like the Oscar Wilde bookshop. And it becomes a political base from which to pressure politicians with a gay voting bloc." I use Berlant and Warner's story to get to their broader point of the right to the city. Leaning on Marxist philosopher Henri Lefebvre in his essay of the same name, the right to the city describes the concept that the right to utilize urban space extends beyond the individual owner of that space. Berlant and Warner write, "We should not make the mistake of confusing the class of citizens with the class of property owners. Many of those who hang out on Christopher Street, typically young, queer, and African American, couldn't possibly afford to live there. Urban space is always a host space. And the right to the city extends to those who use the city. It is not limited to property owners." Henri Lefebvre's The Right to the City is very long, but I want to highlight one more of his ideas, his musings on the loss of the urban oeuvre. Lefebvre notices that the cities of the past are far more lavish and artistic than the cities today. He says, "Cities support peasant communities and the enfranchisement of the peasants, not without benefit to themselves. In short, they are centers for social and political life where not only wealth is accumulated, but knowledge, techniques, and oeuvres. The city is itself oeuvre, a feature which contrasts with the irreversible tendency towards money and commerce, towards exchange and products. Indeed, the oeuvre is use value, and the product is exchange value." Lefebvre goes on to say that while the regimes that built those old cities were often oppressive, the ruling class often spent an extraordinary amount of their wealth on the creation of public works, with a clear importance placed on what he's calling the use value of these public spaces. But as industrialization took over the modern world, urban centers prioritize production of commodities over artistry. The production of products replaced the production of oeuvres and the social relations attached to them, notably the city. When exploitation replaces oppression, creative capacity disappears. So cities stopped being works of art and became the bland centers of industry that they are today. Is it any wonder, then, that the peasantry of urban spaces who once enjoyed the lavish architecture of kings would turn to guerrilla art as they feel their spaces being dominated by corporate interests? How can citizens feel as if they have a right to their city when advertisers can put anything they'd like on subway cars and bus benches, but local artists are demonized and removed? Graffiti artists recognize this dilemma and take matters into their own hands, creating the oeuvre themselves as they would like to see it. In Tulsa, names like Becca, Boost, Mango, Queso, It's Okay, and Foreign, among many others, are at the forefront of the graffiti scene. Ask any Tulsa local, and they are likely to recognize at least some of these names, whether for better or for worse. And like it or not, these people are determined to make their names and their art known all across the city. What these artists are doing is something magical, and I mean that in the literal sense. We typically think of magic as a fairy godmother's sparkling wand or a wizard casting fire from his hands, but according to magical practitioner Aleister Crowley, magic is much more simple. He says, "Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will." So, yes, a wizard who wills for lightning and manifests a bolt with his fingers is performing magic, but from a Crowleyan perspective, someone who decides to get in shape and goes to the gym to work out is also a sorcerer of sorts, changing their environment through sheer discipline and force of will. Graffiti artists are no different. They see their bland environment and decide to use their practice to change the world they live in accordance with their tastes, and they don't care about what laws might stand in their way. Of course, laws are not always beacons of justice. There's no limit to the number of ridiculous or even malicious laws out there. I mean, here in Oklahoma, until pretty recently, it was illegal to get tattoos. In many other areas of our state, it's also illegal to sell alcohol on Sundays. One minor crime was of particular interest to anarchist writer James C. Scott, that being jaywalking. While living in Germany, Scott spent hours observing pedestrians at a crosswalk who spent minutes waiting for a traffic signal on a street completely free of motor vehicles. Although there was no real danger in crossing the street at any time, the social stigma around breaking the law kept most from crossing at their leisure. The setting of Germany was important to Scott, who saw this unwillingness to break the law as the same attitude that allowed the Nazis to come to power. He says, "You know, you, and especially your grandparents, could have used more of a spirit of law-breaking. One day you will be called on to break a big law in the name of justice and rationality. Everything will depend on it. You have to be ready. How are you going to prepare for that day when it really matters? You have to stay in shape so that when the big day comes, you will be ready. What you need is anarchist calisthenics. Every day or so, break some trivial law that makes no sense, even if it's only jaywalking. Use your own head to judge whether the law is just or reasonable. That way, you'll keep trim, and when the big day comes, you'll be ready." This is, unfortunately, a lesson that many Americans may need to learn. The increased aggression of ICE assaults within just the first year of Trump's second term have been staggering, and many Americans have been left wondering what we should do. I think it's helpful at times like this to remember that for Germans in the 1930s, resisting the Nazis was illegal. For workers in the Underground Railroad, resisting slavery was illegal, and many of the tactics that have proven successful in this early fight against ICE have been illegal as well, like the blockade of ICE detention centers or the de-arrests of would-be victims by a mass of protesters. Now, I'm not saying that graffiti is the thin line separating us from fascism, but if anyone has kept up with their anarchist calisthenics, then it is these artists. One of the names you've been seeing in this video, Mango, was recently arrested by the Tulsa Police Department. They gleefully announced his arrest on Facebook and provided these screenshots from a police helicopter they used to track him down. You know, a lot of talk goes into the monetary cost that graffiti has on the city. Mango has been cited at costing over $100,000 in property damage, and I wonder if they will count the cost of flying a police helicopter over town to catch one 18-year-old non-violent criminal in with that cost. Graffiti doesn't actually cost the city anything in the first place. Covering it does. The city spends thousands of dollars covering these works of art in an institutional gray that only on rare occasions matches the surrounding wall. And for what? Can you look at these pictures and honestly say that you prefer the bare walls over the painted ones? It's not like graffiti is causing any physical damage to the wall either. As we stated earlier, paint acts as an aegis, protecting its surface from the elements. But paint is not just protective, it's also a symbol of possession. Rarely do we take the time to paint something that we don't care about, or that will be thrown away. Look at these pieces of pottery made by Native Americans. Each one is delicately painted with colorful imagery because they were meant to be used for lifetimes. Painting them, as Lefebvre would say, increases their use value. It makes them objects that we want to keep around. Compare these with the kulhad teacups that can be found in street vendors' tea shops in India. These cups are made to be disposable, and so obviously no time is wasted in painting each cup. When graffiti artists decide to paint on public property, they are claiming, in the most direct way possible, their right to their city, and they're showing that they care about and are possessive of that city. That body of authority that calls itself the city must erase that stamp. They must spend thousands of dollars on not only apprehending the artists responsible, but also covering their art in that famous slate gray to deny their citizens the right to the city that they occupy. So, which side are you on? Do you think that every jaywalker should be punished to the full extent of the law, or is there a little bit of wiggle room between what is legal and what is right? The next time that you're stuck waiting on a seemingly endless train, try and see past the vandalism and appreciate the artists who put their necks on the line to give you just a little bit of entertainment. The next time that you see a piece of graffiti art outside your local coffee shop, try and see it for what it is: art. Graffiti has been part of urban societies for thousands of years, and with any luck, it will still be here thousands of years from now, as inseparable from urban life as the buildings themselves.